this Cole's bookstore, and I saw this book called Revelations by this fellow, Jacques Vallée. I had no idea who he was, so I picked the book up and I paged through it a little bit, and I had no interest or no understanding of what the issue was. And I read the foreword of the book, and I said, "This guy's talking
Victor,
about
Victor." Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to make a small cut here because there was a technical issue, a delay in putting this live on YouTube. So we missed more or less everything from the start.
Okay.
Bom, as minhas desculpas a todos aqueles que nos estão a ver. Houve de facto aqui um pequeno delay na apresentação e na ligação ao YouTube. Estamos aqui, enfim, já em plena conversa, mas dar-vos as boas-vindas. Obrigado por estarem aí desse lado. É um domingo, mais uma conversa do Exo-Realidades. Desta vez temos connosco Victor Viggiani, que para além de ser o representante da ICER no Canadá, é também o presidente da Assembleia Geral da ICER e também fundou comigo a New Frontier Network, também um podcast onde temos feito várias entrevistas também a outros investigadores. É também o diretor de comunicações da Zealand Communications, uma plataforma de informação canadense. É uma pessoa, enfim, da velha guarda, que já tem décadas décadas de participação em ativismo e também na abordagem do tema OVNI e exopolítica. Conhece praticamente toda a gente, desde o John Mack, tinha uma relação muito próxima com o Paul Hellyer, o antigo Ministro da Defesa do Canadá, como todos sabem, e portanto já íamos com um certo lançamento, um certo andamento nesta nossa conversa. A minha primeira pergunta tinha sido ao Victor, o porquê deste seu interesse na ovnilogia, e era por aí que estávamos a caminhar. Victor, I'm sorry, I just made a new presentation of you in Portuguese, if you're aware. So let's restart, basically. I'm sorry for this. The question is, how did it all started with you being involved in ufology and exopolitics?
Yeah, okay, well, that's fine, yeah.
You can restart, sorry for this.
Yeah, that's okay.
You can go on, please. Victor?
Yeah, I'm okay, yeah. Okay, I understand all the technical problems, and that's fine. We'll work through it. There's no problem there. I understand it. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm having a bit of a problem. I'm hearing two different streams here.
Yeah, probably. Do you have the YouTube also on? If you do have, please.
Maybe I should shut that off if I have it.
Yeah, just leave the Zoom on. Just the Zoom session.
Okay. Yes, I see. Okay, that's it. Okay, got it. Okay, there we go. Okay, I've shut down the YouTube.
Okay.
I have no idea about technology. Okay, I have enough trouble tying my shoes up, so that's not. In any case, yes, your question, how I got involved, the whole reset here. Back in, I think it was 1971 or 1972, I was up at my cottage in Northern Ontario, and my wife was shopping at a mall, and I went into a Cole's bookstore, which is like a Barnes and Nobles or whatever, and I saw this book, and I had no reference to it before. I had no interest in it. The book was called Revelations by Jacques Vallée, and I picked it up off the shelf, and I just paged through, and I said, he was starting to talk about UFOs. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I read more and more. I read the foreword. And then I said, I need to take this book home and digest it. So I took it back to the cottage and began reading it and read it. It's a very small book. It's not a very big one. But in reading it, I said, what is this man talking about? He's talking about craft from off-world origins and civilizations. And so that summer, in fact, I read the book Up at the Cottage 3 times just to basically understand what Jacques Vallée was talking about. And after that, I became totally embedded in the whole issue of the UFO concept. And then from there, I joined MUFON and did a lot of different things with investigating, sighting reports, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually, the tip-off point for me was not necessarily dealing with UFO sightings. I got to realize that this was not an issue about lights in the sky. This was an issue of the political secrecy within the military governmental complex to hide this information. And I'm sort of, bringing everybody up to speed very quickly on that. That's what I got to understand, that this issue was being covered up by the United States government and all of the NATO countries, and in fact, all of the G20 countries. And that's what really spurred me on to realize that not only was this an important issue as far as I was concerned personally, but this was a global issue. This was not something that was attached to the U.S. military or to the French military. It was an issue that had to deal with personages, people, and entities and political entities within the substructure of secrecy. And that's where I got involved in realizing that the issue of secrecy was probably the shell around the nut of disclosure. And in order to crack that nut, what we had to do is look at what the global experience was, not necessarily within one particular country or organization, what the global aspects of this was. And that's why I got involved with it, both journalistically and then on the radio with Strange Days Indeed back in the early 1990s with respect to Earl Bruce Knapp and Strange Days Indeed, and investigating all of this with a number of what you called, Francesco, the old guard, and I was part of that. I was part of the new beginning of this thing called disclosure. So that's where it all started. That's what really energized me to kind of recognize that this was not just about UFO sightings in the sky, lights in the sky. This was about how the lies on the ground were really propelling the mendacity in media, in government, and all of those other things that kept this issue hidden. So that's what really kind of energized me to get more and more deeply involved in this issue.
You were also, you came to Portugal. We had a
oh, yes.
good cup of coffee here in Porto, and I think it was the same year that Mike Bird also came to Porto, and I was with him as well. So both you and Mike Bird, you were mostly the big representatives from Canada in the early days. Right. Did you both work together with Stanton Friedman in any way? Based in Canada, your growing up in ufology was mostly in Canada, or did you reach out to US friends, American friends? How? Because eventually you also started to develop a relationship with Stephen Bassett, etc., and then later with Paul Hellyer. Could you?
Well, let's maybe outline how that evolved, because back in 2005, I was part of a program. Mike Bird and I had posed that we have a symposium here in Toronto at the University of Toronto, and it's a huge organization. And so Mike Bird and I decided to have a symposium on UFO disclosure and planetary directions. And we invited Stephen Bassett and Richard Dolan and Stanton Friedman to this presentation at the University of Toronto, which landed up having over 500 people in the audience. But at the time, what happened was during an interview on Strange Days Indeed, I found out that someone connected with me that said, you have to contact Paul Hellyer. And I said, what do you mean? I think at that time I knew Paul Hellyer as the former Minister of Defense, but I had no idea that he was interested in the UFO issue at the time. So this individual, Jim, I'll call him Jim for now, he said, you've got to call Paul because he's interested in this stuff. And I really didn't kind of get into it right away. But about 2 weeks later, I called Paul and I said, Mr. Hellyer, my name is Victor Viggiani. We're having a symposium here in September. And would you like to be part of it? And with respect to the UFO issue. And at the time, he was reading the book The Day After Roswell by Philip J. Corso. And he said, oh, no, I could never go public on this. So I said, okay, that's fine. That's the way he approached me to begin with.
That was in 2005.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So eventually I literally gnawed at him. I said, Paul, that's great. I'll call you back in a week. I did. And then he had finished the book by then, Philip J. Corso's book. And he said, Victor, I will be part of your symposium. And that's when history changed here in Canada. He came forward in 2005 at our symposium and told us that UFOs are real, and that they're as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. And that's where history takes over here in Canada with respect to Paul Hellyer. And he came forward and I know Paul well enough. He's a good friend. He was a good friend of mine. He passed away last August. He always blames me for getting him involved in this, because when he told his wife at the time, he said, this is just a one-off thing. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do any more on this issue. But as it turned out, he went all over the planet. He went globally with this issue. So I respect the man, and he really bought into the issue. And I'm so fortunate to have been part of his history with this. So he is a part of this, and he is something that his legacy will sustain itself through all of this. And eventually, when any kind of disclosure does happen, Paul Hellyer will in fact be part of this.
Philip?
The FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, seemed to become an important source of official information. John Greenwald Jr. Has impressive results and became an expert using that tool. Is that the FOIA in Canada? And have you ever tried to obtain official information on Canadian official incidents with UFOs?
Oh, yes, of course. It's a great question. John Greenwald is an expert at the FOIA intervention or request. He does it very well. He knows it probably better than anyone within the UFO research community. He does it very, very well, and he obtains documents that are extremely prescient, extremely important within the work that he does. And the last one that he got, your listeners should know, was the Obama letter that is on his website, indicating that the Obama administration was seriously invested in this issue. And we knew this all along. This is not a surprise to me or anyone within the research community. We knew that the Obama administration was invested in this. We knew that John Podesta, his chief of staff, and also the chief of staff for Bill Clinton, and eventually Podesta became the transition co-chair of Obama's administration. So we knew that John Podesta was seriously invested in this. So John Greenwald has made some serious interventions within this. Now, with respect to Canada, Canada's FOIA situation is a bit different. We call it access to information here in Canada. And I have made, oh my goodness, I can't count, literally over a dozen for access to information requests regarding the NORAD, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a coterminous organization that covers all of the North American airspace here in North America. And I asked them, what do you have on scrambled jets with respect to UFOs or UAP or unidentified objects or unknown targets, or what they call tracks of interest? And I got back 106 pages on this information. So the Access to Information Act here in Canada is a very viable and very important way of getting to what NORAD here in Canada has with respect to this. And the stuff that I've put out One example is two CF-18 jets chasing 3 UFOs over Canada at 35,000 feet, and then eventually over several minutes making contact with 3 UFOs. So that's the kind of information that NORAD has, and that's the kind of information that I've discovered. So we know, in fact, that the Canadian Air Force and NORAD does have information with respect to unauthorized incursions over Canadian airspace of craft of unknown origin. So we know that for a fact. It's not something that's speculation. It's not something that's sort of spiritualist or whatever. We know, in fact, that NORAD has made these kind of interventions. So yes, this Freedom of Information Act, otherwise known as Access to Information here in Canada, is a very important conduit through which we can investigate the issue of UAP here over Canadian airspace.
There was some news about 2 weeks ago about some documents that were released regarding UFOs in Canada.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a really big question. I hope we can delve into that more specifically. I'll try to give you a thumbnail sketch of what's going on. What happened was, okay, I'll set the stage here. In Canada, we have our parliament, okay? And in our parliament, we have members of parliament, and we have committees and, representations, etc. But there is a committee that exists within the parliamentary system. It's called the Committee on Natural Resources, and the vice chair of that committee, his name is Larry Maguire, and he's the vice chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Natural Resources. And he went forward in a committee meeting with the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources and asked him the question, we have some information here about in 3 or more situations here in Canada of overflights of unknown objects over Canadian nuclear installations. Now, we're not talking missiles here because Canada has no missiles. We don't have any missiles in silos. We have no nuclear weapons at our disposal. Canada doesn't do that. But what we have over 19 nuclear reactors that supply energy to the rest of Canada, which provides about 30% of our energy, actually. But the fact of the matter was that in 3 situations, and possibly more, UFOs, UAP, drones, unknowns, characterize them as you will, were flying over these nuclear installations that supply energy to Canada. And we have descriptions of lights in the sky, of things moving up and down, moving forward, orange lights. And what Larry Maguire did, he asked the Deputy Prime Minister, do you know anything about these things? Do you know anything about craft of unknown origin flying over Canadian nuclear facilities? And the Deputy Prime Minister, and if you want to look at the video, I'll cite that in a moment. The Deputy Minister looked at Larry Maguire with this blank look and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, we have no knowledge about that. So this means that people in Parliament are trying to go after this information. So further to that, the Larry Maguire, who's the member of Parliament, said, do you know about what the United States Intelligence Committee, Senate Intelligence Committee, is doing with respect to this? The National Authorization Act, investigating UAP. Once again, the Deputy Prime Minister said, we have no knowledge of this at all. So essentially what we're saying is that the Canadian government, the people in the Natural Resources Committee and the ministry have no idea what's going on with respect to UAP, with respect to what the US Senate is doing. So they're operating on a basis of ignorance. So Larry Maguire, the member of Parliament, and pardon me if I prolong this discussion, asked, he said, we will send you all this information. So what Larry Maguire did, he drafted a letter, and that's on our website at Zealand Communications, stating that not only have these craft been seen by multiple individuals, by multiple citizens, but he also cited the fact that he was briefed, Larry Maguire, a member of Parliament in Canada, was briefed by Luis Elizondo on this issue. And all of your listeners probably know, if they're informed, who Luis Elizondo is. So Larry Maguire, a Canadian MP, has been briefed by Luis Elizondo on this issue. So now what's happening here is a confluence of information with respect to unknown objects flying over nuclear facilities here in Canada and the Pentagon operational ATIP program. So there's a connection there. And Larry Maguire is trying to make that connection in order to bring forward the fact that UAP are flying over in an unauthorized way over Canadian nuclear installations. And that here in Canada, and that's what I'm trying to do, is make that big news. This is incredibly important information that's yet to be fleshed out, and there's more information coming on it.
Filipe, desculpa que eu tinha te interrompido há pouco.
It seems the Canadian involvement in the UFO issue may be bigger and deeper than we thought. Victor, have you had some difficulties to find the right keywords to address the Canadian FOIA?
Finding the right keywords.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very important issue for anyone who seeks any kind of access to information. You have to use the right words. When I first attempted to do this back in 2010, I'm talking a long time ago here, my inquiries, I used the word UFOs. I used the UAP wasn't really part of it then, but I used the word UFO, and I made, how many jets were scrambled to chase UFOs. I got back, we don't have any information on UFOs. And why? Well, they don't use that language. That's the problem. You have to ask, you have to frame the question in the right language. So their terminology for UFOs is TOIs, tracks of interest, or unknown tracks, or just simply unknowns. So if you ask a question framed as a UFO, they won't give anything to you. But if you ask a question about tracks of interest, TOIs, or unknown targets, then you might get a response, which in fact I did. And it took me 6 months, Philippe, to get to the point where I asked, or I framed my questions in the right way so that I got the right answers back. And as soon as I asked the right questions, using the right terminology, using the right language, I got 106 pages of references of UFOs, UAPs, or call it what you want. And the most intrusive was that the Comox Air Force Base, F-18s chasing 3 UFOs over Canada in 2001. So it all came forward. And the only reason it came forward is because I used the right terminology. And that's really important to understand, that if you ask for UFOs, they just throw their hands up and say, no, we don't have anything on UFOs. So it's a bit of a game. And so you have to play the game as they play it. So I was able to figure out the game and move my chess men to the point where they responded to me with 106 pages of really, really good information.
Canada, you were mentioning in a moment ago about the Luis Elizondo informing the deputies in the parliament from the Canadian parliament. And there's a history in terms of Canadians informing also US officials like Wilbert Smith, right?
Yeah.
In 1947, 48. When was that?
In that time frame with Wilbur Smith? Yeah, Wilbur Smith. Yeah.
So could you also there's how can I say, there's well, these are 2 neighboring countries, so there's flow of information, of course, right? But that the Wilbur Smith memo was in some way highly regarded in the US because it made news. Even today, it's talked about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's great that you brought that up, Francesco, because Wilbert Smith, he was a radio engineer for the Department of Transport here in Canada. And people might think that the Department of Transport, what might they know about this? Well, Wilbert Smith, being a radio engineer about this, was given the responsibility of finding out as much as he could about the electromagnetic potentials or capabilities of quote unquote back then UFOs. That he was also tasked with going down to the United States and meeting with embassy officials and scientific officials within the administration back then, within the presidency, of investigating or talking about or asking questions about what these UFOs were all about. And what he did was he went down there and spoke with several individuals, A, with the Canadian embassy in Washington, and B, scientific advisors with respect to the presidential scientific community within the administration back then. And he found out that he came back with, and I'm paraphrasing here, 3 or 4 specific recommendations in his report back to the Minister of Transportation here in Canada. So he was just an official, a sub-official. So he came back, made a report, and he said, first of all, the people that I spoke to admitted that UFOs are in fact real. And so that was the A part of it. And B, he said their modus operandi, in other words, what technologies they were using, were totally arcane and totally unexplainable at the time. And then the C part of it was that this information was being kept secret at the most top levels within the American government. And this is what Wilbert Smith found out. And many of us here.
He even said that it was more important than the H-bomb.
Exactly.
Right? That's the quote that is more known about. Right?
I'm glad you brought that up. And more important or more salient than the H-bomb. And for a radio engineer in Canada to say something like that, meant that he got inside of the secrecy envelope, and Stanton Friedman, when he was alive back many years ago, he and I talked about this at length, and Stanton considers the Wilbert Smith memo as the smoking gun, and it will eventually be proven to be the smoking gun about how the Canadian government, the Ministry of Transport, got to the inner workings of the American government, and how he got it, and what he did, and how it all came out in the public venue is yet to be discovered. So I'm glad you brought it up, and it will eventually become a historical document that everyone will recognize as a major feature of disclosure.
Mm-hmm. Philippe?
Nowadays, when we address the UFO phenomena, we found several other possible explanations than the extraterrestrial hypothesis. We have time travelers, we have interdimensional intelligences, we have inner Earth habitants. Can you share with us your opinions about each one of these other hypotheses?
My short answer is I don't know, but I do have opinions on that. How can I make sense of that question? Because as soon as you introduce those kinds of ideas with respect to time travel, interdimensionality, and other aspects of the UAP issue, what you automatically do is you introduce the idea of the questionable nature of what this phenomenon is all about. And as we go through this as a civilization, and it's really, really important that everyone understand that this is not happening within the last 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or even 50 or 60 or 70 years. This is an issue. This is a problem, a category of information that's existed for thousands of years. Okay. And anyone who would suggest that this is something that's only happened within the last 70 years is dead wrong in the water. This is something that the human species, the human family, has been experiencing for thousands, if not more, numbers of years. Okay. Whoever these civilizations are, whoever these off-world people are, these beings are, they have been engaging the planet for a long, long time, dating way back further than anyone could ever imagine. Now, what that means ultimately, I have no idea. But if you fast forward to all of the political and military information that we have right now, what we're doing is we're looking at in a very myopic view. Okay, we're looking at through some really serious blinkers. So if you contrast what's going on right now with the ancient alien theory that we have been engaged by these off-world civilizations for many, many thousands of years, those two ideas clash. And then you introduce the idea of why these off-world civilizations are here. Are they here because of their physical presence, okay, over any number of decades, or are they here because they have some sort of capacity to move through time, as you suggested, Philippe, okay, or move through dimensions, as you suggested? And I am open to all of those possibilities. There is no way that I could suggest, or that anyone should suggest, that these beings, wherever they're from, have or could have or do have the capacity to move A in time or B interdimensionally. So these are all aspects of this UAP issue that we are just becoming introduced to as a UFO research community. Now, we don't want to even suggest this to the general public. If we were to suggest to the general public that we were engaged by time travelers, we'd lose their attention right away. I mean, we have to deal with the basic issue, A, that they're here. We are, in fact, being engaged by off-world civilizations. So let's leave it there for a moment. But then why they're here, how they're here, that's a question for another time. And it's something that I would not want to delay that discussion. I would not put down that discussion. But in order to bring this stuff forward to the general public, to the people in restaurants, to the people riding on buses, to the people, working in offices, we have to deal with the present characterization of this issue. And the present characterization of this issue is, in fact, that A, that we're not alone in the cosmos, and B, that we are, in fact, being engaged by off-world civilizations. Where they come from, who they are, it's kind of a discussion for another day. I mean, we can talk about that for a long,
especially
long time.
Because that part of the question can be highly complex, because there can be multiple origins.
That's right, exactly. And controversial. I mean, you and I, Francesco, know. I mean, as soon as you suggest something on internet or on any one of the interviews that we do, as soon as you suggest, let's say, for example, time travel, you're jumped all over. What are you talking about? So you really have to take your time in framing this issue so that the general public, that's the audience that we have to deal with here, okay? That the general public at least begins to understand that A, as I said earlier, that we're not alone in the cosmos, and B, we're being engaged by off-world civilizations. Okay, if we get that concept into the common discourse of everyday journalism and television coverage, and if we get that kind of information, then we can begin to discuss all of the things that Philippe just talked about: time travel, interdimensionality. Those things are part of a discussion that has to happen a bit later. Right now, if we do that, we're going to lose everybody. That's my opinion. Okay, so we have to be very careful, circumspect about how we bring this issue forward in a very, very calm, orderly, professional, and journalistic way. And that's why that's what I try to do. I try not to sensationalize things. I keep it to a level of ordinary discourse. And that's what Zealand Communications is all about. So your question about the other aspect of this, Philippe, is an important one, but I think it's something that we can't deal with right now, but we'll eventually have to deal with it as we move down this path to disclosure.
There was a question in the chat box by Ricardo, who was wondering or do you think that this discussion will have to allow the inclusion of paranormal research? I mean, if we go and consider the Skinwalker Ranch and similar other places where paranormal is a high factor, This is also puzzling. How, because if you go there, we have to assume so many. It's really strange.
Yeah, it is really strange. Oh boy, I'm glad you said those words. It is really strange, and I've been trying to follow as closely as I can this whole on television here in Canada with the History Channel, the whole idea of the Skinwalker Ranch and the portals and all of that. My assessment of all of that would be that whoever these beings are, whoever they are, and wherever they're from, they have multiple capacities to communicate in their own realm, and they are probably doing it, on their own within their own civilizations, their collective civilizations. They've done it for thousands of years, and we are just becoming part of that here on this planet Earth. And with respect to what they do and how it's framed on the Skinwalker Ranch, my assessment is that this has been going on with them on other planets and even their own planets for thousands of years. This is something they take for granted, like you and I would walk across the road. However, with respect to the planet Earth, this is something very, very new. And if you discuss the idea of portals or what's going on at the Skinwalker Ranch, I think it's just a manifestation of how these beings are gradually introducing their presence to us. They're introducing their presence to us in a multiple number of ways, one of which is this thing called UFOs, UAP. I mean, they're here, they're manifesting, they're doing things that show themselves. So that's one way they manifest themselves. The other way they're manifesting themselves is a very important one, which I think is key, is the contactee experience. So we talk about that later. The other way that they're manifesting themselves are these so-called portals into interdimensionality with respect to how it's being manifested on the Skinwalker Ranch. Those are multiplicity of ways that they're trying to communicate with us. So we as a human family, we as a human species, and those of us who investigate this have to understand all three of those. And where do we place those in how we communicate with these beings? And as John Mack said in one of his lectures, that some of these things that are going on are sort of an outreach program for the cosmically impaired. We as a human species really are cosmically impaired. We really don't understand what's going on in the cosmos. And I think what's going on is these off-world civilizations, as manifested in many different ways. There's not just one or two, there's a multiplicity of off-world civilizations. They are attempting to make sense to us. And I don't think we're right now.
The thing is, in our rationality,
right?
Sometimes it's difficult to understand contact. One thing is, the abduction scenario, the contactee scenario, when there's like face-to-face interactions with other beings.
Right.
But poltergeists, orbs, the tricksters with werewolves, etc., that we see in the Skinwalker Ranch, it's completely different. It has nothing to do. If that's a way of communicating, I mean, for us, it's difficult to rationalize that.
Well, for sure, it's like what it's like. It's like teaching someone to play catch in baseball. Okay. I taught my son to play catch and you throw one ball back and forth and you teach him to play catch with one ball and back and forth and back and forth. But what would happen if I stood there before my son and I had 15 different baseballs and I threw all of those balls at him all at once? It's easy to catch one ball, but there's no way that he would be able to catch all of the baseballs that I would throw at him. And that's what's happening here. The human family is being thrown so much information about this, as you say, the paranormal, the UFO issue. It's very difficult to rationalize it because we don't have the capacity to deal with the multiplicity of this issue. And eventually the human species might eventually be able to deal with it. But right now, we have to take one ball at a time and look at it and say, okay, here's what that means. Okay, give me the next one. And we can only deal with one thing at a time. But each one of these issues, that, as you mentioned, the paranormal and poltergeist and all of those things, my assessment, Francesco, it's all part of the reality of the cosmos, and how it integrates with the UFO UAP issue. Oh, that's something that we might understand, years from now. We might see, oh my goodness, that's what it meant. And the other idea here is, what the afterlife. What happens in the afterlife? I mean, I've read so much. Leslie Kean did a wonderful presentation at her Rice University about the afterlife, and she's written a lot about it. And my question would be, why has Leslie Kean, a writer on the UFO issue politically and militarily, why has she made the transition from all of the UFO information into the afterlife? And I think it's all kind of interconnected in a very, very strange way. So we're going to have to find out those answers.
I'm going to ask Philippe, well, lead to Philippe to a new question, but you raise an interesting subject as well, the afterlife, because John Mack also was making that connection, right?
Definitely. Yes, he was. He was very in touch with that issue. He knew that once the corporeal essence of human beings ended, in other words, once this body here finishes, there is an essence to this body that moves on to another realm. And he fully realized that, and he fully understood that either that was part of how the human species was transitioning into the next level of existence. Okay, and then what he did was, through some of the contactees or experiences that he dealt with, their information about how our non-corporeal essence was moved forward within the contact experience. And then once the corporeal essence of who we were as physical beings ended, and then how our own spiritual essence moved on to the next level of existence. So he was fully in touch with that. And so I think those issues, the contactee issue and the so-called life after death issue, they sort of meld each other eventually into a consciousness that I think expects or understands or moves forward the interconnectivity of all matter within the cosmos. And once again, here we go, entertaining the idea of the connectivity of all matter and all beings within the cosmos. So it's such an entwined issue and once you attempt to separate them all, sometimes you get a ball of wool and it's all tangled, and you try to separate the ball of wool into its constituent parts. You begin to understand it. But right now, we're just at the very beginning of trying to disassemble that ball of wool, that very tangled ball of wool. And it's a serious problem. It's a serious challenge for the human race to do that. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're attempting to put forward information to untangle this issue, to make sense of it all. And for myself, what's the core of the issue? I think the core of the issue is, in fact, the paranormal, Francesco. I'm going to say that in blatant terms. I think the paranormal is the conduit through which we will eventually understand what these beings are attempting to say to us.
Philippe?
How does the Canadian press and public opinion react to the UFO issue nowadays? Are people still talking about lights in the sky and blurred images, or have they moved forward to the actual developments from 2017 on?
Excellent question. I could talk about, Francesco knows I could talk about this one for about an hour. How's the press reacting? Well, let me start with 2017. And 2017 was a pivotal year within this whole issue. And that year was a bookmark in my assessment of how things unfolded with the New York Times, with Ralph Blumenthal, Helena Cooper, and Leslie Kean coming forward with the ATIP program, the videos, and all of that. And it was an extremely important, I guess, revelation, an opening of a door into this whole issue. So it was extremely important, and I can't stress it too much, that 2017 was a pivotal point. And then what happened after that, on December 17th, I got information from some inside sources that Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper had done this. And that was on December 17th. And the next day, I contacted the Current. The Current is a radio program up in here in Canada that goes all across Canada every day from approximately 8:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock. And it is the 60 minutes on radio of an investigative journalism. And these people at the Current investigate everything. And the host at the time was Anna Maria Tremonti, who I'd had conversations with over email several times. So I sent out the information regarding the 2017 New York Times article to her producer, Josh Blosh. And I sent it out. Here's the New York Times article. Within hours, which had definitely been different from before, he contacted me by phone, said, Victor Viggiani, yes, Josh Blosh from the Current. What is this all about? So I tried to outline it as best I could. And here's what's happening: the ATIP program, Luis Elizondo, the Pentagon, on and on and on about all the details about what Blumenthal, Kane, and Cooper released. And he said, this is very interesting. So this was on I believe it was the Thursday or the Friday of that week of December 17th. But the next Monday, it's on from Monday to Friday. The next Monday, Anna Maria Tremonti on the Current interviewed several individuals about the New York Times article. Nick Pope, Chris Rutkowski, and one other individual. So the Current actually picked up on this. It was the first radio station, the first radio entity across Canada to do this. So initially, the Canadian media, as far as I was concerned, picked up on it. They actually got a statement from the Air Force here in Canada that they asked the question, do you know about this? The Current asked the Canadian Air Force, and they had no statement about it. They said, we don't even deal with this. So the fact of the matter, at that time in 2017, the Current was ready to deal with the issue. And then it fell off the cliff. No more language, no more coverage. Okay. So I have to ask the question, why did my communication with the Current fall off the cliff? And so in answer to your question, Philippe, I think that the CBC here in Canada and the general media just did not have the courage to go forward to deal with this issue. Why? I don't know. I've been supplying them Global TV, CTV News, and CBC with all the information, but they just do not have the courage to deal with this issue. Why they do that? That's for a discussion within the editorial rooms within these media organizations. So it's a very difficult problem that we're still confronting here in Canada, as they are within the United States and potentially globally.
How did the media react to the declarations of Paul Hellyer, and even the research that Stanton Friedman did about Roswell?
The general media here in Canada?
The general media, yeah, because well, these are two well-known people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
From Canada. So
well, we can take Paul Hellyer to begin with. Paul Hellyer, back in 2005, when he came forward, as I articulated before, initially there were some light coverage, very, very peripheral coverage of what Paul did. And no one really, he was interviewed a couple of times on some radio stations. We had across Canada venture ourselves, the Modern Knowledge Tour. We went to Calgary and Montreal, Vancouver, and so on. We got very, very minimal coverage on Paul's assessment of what was going on, in addition to people like Stanton Friedman, who was with us, and Richard Dolan, who was with us. It got very, very peripheral coverage, very light coverage. And I suppose the sustainability of what we were trying to get through never really cracked what I call the glass ceiling of media. We know that certain issues have the capacity to pierce the glass ceiling I guess public discourse, like the pandemic or what's going on in the Ukraine. This issue did not crack the glass ceiling. It got minimal coverage, but it really didn't get major coverage. Now, Stanton Friedman, who was a very influential entity within the UFO research community, did way back in the 1960s and 70s on As It Happens, which was part of CBC again. As It Happens was a very influential communication device within the CBC, and Stanton Friedman was interviewed several times by Carol Off and by a number of individuals on As It Happens, but it never really grabbed the media to the point where it made front page news. So my assessment is that somehow the Canadian, press, as they did in the United States and probably globally, managed to leak this stuff out a little bit, but never made big news about what these UFOs were all about, why they were here, and what the political implications are. Now, if you were to ask me, why does the media not take this stuff seriously? That's a discussion that we could go on with for hours. But I think there's a certain mendacity among the media that says it's just not the right time for this to come forward. And who's responsible for that kind of mendacity and repression is another question altogether.
Philippe?
What will be needed to have the UFO subject again in the prime time news?
What will be necessary? Well, my first answer to that question would be a frontal lobotomy about all of the media news. I think that, and I'm saying that in just in one way, but I'm very serious about this. What would be necessary for the mainstream media to really grab onto this issue? And my feeling is that until this issue is recognized first of all, on a global level, which Francesco and I are both involved with, a major initiative with the ICER component. We can talk about that later. What has to happen is that the global community first of all has to recognize it as important. Okay, that's the first thing that has to happen. And once they recognize the importance of this, the only sense that I see that would be important to mainstream media, and we can debate this, is the technological aspects of what the UAP issue really, really means. I mean, contact is one thing, fine. UFOs and lights in the sky, that's fine. But if we entertain a global discussion about what the UAP, what the UFO issue really represents with respect to technology, what their propulsion systems are all about, and if we can come to grips with an open dialogue about what this technology actually is, we're talking anti-gravitic technology, we're talking about anti-gravity technology, electromagnetic capacities, and superluminal travel. How do these craft move at superluminal speeds, faster than the speed of light? What technologies, what energy sources are they using to move from point A to point B in the cosmos? Now, put aside the idea of time travel for a second, put aside the idea of interdimensionality. Let's just isolate ourselves with respect to technology, and what technologies are some of these species using to move from wherever they are here to the planet Earth. And if we can understand what those technologies are and introduce some sort of experimentation here on the planet and using those technologies, anti-gravity technologies, this whole idea of zero-point energy, and that technology could relieve the pressure of fossil fuels on our planet. And once the transition is made from understanding that kind of technology that propels these craft to displacing fossil fuels, then I think it would be very viable for governments to move forward with experimentation on that, and then challenge the fossil fuel industries to end the digging for oil, and then begin experimentation with these anti-gravitic technologies. That, to me, just my opinion, if those kinds of issues were brought forward to the Canadian public and globally to the human family, that we do not need to use fossil fuels anymore, that we have access to anti-gravitic technologies that will displace fossil fuels and eliminate the threat to the environment, eliminate global warming. All of those things might make sense to the rest of the human family and to the human species. So in answer to your question, that's what I think could actually cut through all of this discourse. We can't talk about right now, contactee right now. We have to get to the technologies that these craft are using to help us understand that this could be a solution to the planetary degradation of our environment. That to me is the number one issue.
But can that also be the reason for censoring information once all the companies that are involved with fossil fuels are the ones that fund the governments and
big time
everything else in society? So
some sort of conflict of interest.
Of course, the pushback from the oil industry, the corporations that control all of the money underground, will be venomous. It will be. They will launch a counterattack against any kind of situation that would allow them to an agreement where their fossil fuel sources have to remain underground. They will fight tooth and nail to repress this. So there's another challenge that faces us. But I think that it's well worthwhile bringing forward to public discourse. That's what we have to do. We have to create an environment within which this kind of discussion about technologies, alternate technologies, I'm not talking about solar energy, that's or wind energy. I mean, that's, it's nice, it sounds cool, but it really doesn't get to the issue of solving the fossil fuel industry. And it's much like the tobacco industry. Okay, they had to capitulate in admitting that they were killing people. They had to admit it, and they went before Congress, and not just in the United States, but in other countries, and they had to admit that their product was killing people. So how long will it be before the fossil fuel industry will admit that their commodity, fossil fuels, oil, gas, is killing the planet? When will that happen? And that's a question that I think that has to be brought forward. When will the fossil fuel industry admit that what they're producing is killing the planet? Not just human beings, it's killing the planet. That's a big nut to crack. And I don't see that happening unless something really, really intrusive occurs within the discourse that we're having right now.
And there's also the problem that free energy can be used in a very bad way as well, right? Humans are not ready. You can see what happened to Tesla, for instance, right?
Of course. Mm-hmm.
So much energy in the wrong hands, it's not a good idea, right?
That's the big flaw, and you raise a really good point, Francesco. That's the flaw in the human species. What it does, it points to the political immaturity that this planet has. Anytime you create a situation, which we've done, over the ages, of creating borders, of creating, national entities. As soon as you create borders, you create a sense of possession. And as soon as you create a sense of possession, you create a sense of, we need to defend our borders. And then from there is that, well, what weapons do we use to defend our borders? And that's what the human species has been involved in for millennia. And we see that right now. It still exists. As soon as the idea of an international community, of a human family that's together, that understands who we are as a human species, as soon as that kind of ideology is brought forward for discussion, just perhaps this whole idea of using these energy sources for weapons might decline. But right now, I don't see that.
We are still a very long way to that.
We're still, it's like it's almost, it's almost like the
Stone Age. It's before Stone Age.
Exactly, right? Exactly. You hit the nail right in the head. It's before Stone Age. That's where we're at. And I think, to be really honest with you, Philippe and Francesco, I think that's where these off-world civilizations see us. I think they see us as a species who has a lot of potential, but we're still operating in the Stone Age or before. And we've got a long way to go to understand how we can move into the next generation of understanding about who they are as a species.
Talking a little about disclosure process.
Mm-hmm.
You also have been involved in some way with Stephen Bassett. I think you were involved at least with the connection with Paul Hellyer to bring him to the Citizens Hearing initiative.
Yeah.
How do you see disclosure right now, before 2017, after 2017, and considering that right now we are almost in some niches of the research talking about multidimensional time travel, etc. So what implications what implications to disclosure, and how do you see disclosure right now?
Well, let's start with how I see disclosure at this moment, and we can move backwards or forward with your question. How I'm seeing disclosure right now is let's start with what's happening in the United States with respect to the Senate Intelligence Committee that's happening with Rubio and Warner and all the people that are involved with the National Authorization Act. Okay, what Rubio and Warner did in bringing forward
I believe that maybe some of our viewers may not know who Rubio is and Warner.
Okay.
So if you can,
it's
I
Senator
know, but
Rubio,
maybe people don't.
So, Senator Rubio and Senator Mark Warner were chair and vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee on Intelligence, and what they did was they brought forward the National Disclosure Act, the National Defense Act, and what it did was, this act is an act that puts forward on a yearly basis funding for the military and intelligence agencies within the United States. But somehow Senator Mark Rubio, and Senator Mark Warner injected language about, and how this happened, we don't really know, but they injected language about having the Director of National Intelligence within the United States report on UAP. Okay? Provide all kinds of information, data, and so on and so forth. And this was like a total surprise to everybody. I mean, this act comes forward every single year, but all of a sudden, Mark Warner and Senator Rubio bring forward this act, demanding that the Director of National Intelligence report on UAP. It caught everybody off guard. Why are they putting this language about UFOs or UAP in an act? That changed the whole scenario. So it brought forward into legislation, and this is like law, okay? So the Director of National Intelligence had to provide the Senate Intelligence Committee with information about UAP. This meant videos, data about UFO sightings, et cetera, et cetera. So that in and of itself happened about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now. So that act provided a conduit through disclosure, made a huge leap forward. And it was a direct response to what happened in 2017. So what we have right now is disclosure at a point where it is politically relevant to discourse, and politically relevant to the possibility of the Senate Intelligence Committee to come forward with opening hearings about the videos, about the Navy experience with pilots, about the missile shutdown era of Robert Salas and Malmstrom Air Force Base. It is opening the door to the possibility of Senate hearings on this issue. And that's where we're headed right now in terms of what disclosure might mean. And, right now with what's going on in the Ukraine and everything else with the pandemic, disclosure has sort of taken a bit of a back seat, I must admit. And it's not as evident that that's where this whole idea of progress with disclosure is happening, because there's just too many other issues going on. So that's how I see disclosure at this point. It's still there. The potential of it is extremely, extremely powerful, but I just don't think it's going to, as I said earlier, it's not going to cut through the glass ceiling at this point. So if the American government can walk and chew gum at the same time, in other words, deal with the Ukraine issue, deal with the pandemic, deal with inflation, and also deal with the possibility of opening hearings with respect to the UAP, if they can do it, and they can do it, they've done it before, we may be able to see disclosure take another step forward. But I'm not overly hopeful that's going to happen at this point in time. It's there, but it's not just something that's going to ignite, like that.
You were talking about the parts of technology that could engage the interest of media and society, of course. And we talked about the dangers. But one thing that struck me in the past, in 2017, when ATIP was made known, and there were a couple of documents that were released, one of them involving a list of 38 research programs that involved several universities and labs and companies. And those research programs involved exotic technology, things from science fiction, wormholes, portals, stargates, dark matter, and there was no interest, right? So
why?
There, I mean, that could be. I mean, if there are companies and there are universities that are involved in such research, I would see all media interests. Is society going to leap in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology? How is this involved with UAPs, etc.? And the questions were not asked.
Well, yeah, it's the idea that academics, the academic community is beginning to look at all of this stuff. The Rice University example is a very good one that examined the paranormal, and the ones that you cite. And if you step back and look at societal change over the millennium has not necessarily been brought forward by science. Science has been so wrong in so many different ways over the millennia. We can count the ways from Galileo and the Catholic Church and all of that. They have been so dead wrong with so many different things. But the one thing that has always allowed us, the society, if you step back far enough, to move forward with the ideological or the philosophical questions has been the academic community. And that, I think, is where the reference point of what you're saying is really, really important. If the universities, as you frame it, Francesco, are investigating, talking about, or even just entering into discourse about this, eventually those within the academic community have a way of influencing science in the same way that the academic community influenced the science of the day back in the days of Galileo. And I think we're at a very inflection point with respect to that. As soon as academics begin to dialogue about the kinds of things you're talking about, the technologies, etc., it has a way of becoming, how can I say it? Infiltrating, is it? Maybe that's not the right word, but infiltrating thought within the community. And it has a way of sending out its tentacles of ideology, of philosophy, of understandings within the general community. And it's a bedrock of understanding. And eventually, those kinds of ideas, like whether or not the Earth is the center of the universe, which is proven wrong, it eventually embedded itself into the scientific community, and then eventually the rational public community. Okay, so we began to understand that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and as it moved forward in the dialogue, eventually the academic community was responsible for it dispersing itself. And I think we're at the same point right now. And I think that what's going on with respect to what you just articulated, the academic community and universities, I think eventually once these professors or the academics get their way within media, and that's the next step, because back in the days of Galileo, there was no mainstream media. Once these academics get the ear of the mainstream media, I think that's another conduit through which the mainstream media could introduce this idea as a focal point in news, much the same way as planetary climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So its day is coming. Its day is coming, and if the academic community sticks to its guns, I really think that there's a good possibility that those within the media, the Ralph Blumenthal's, for example, and Leslie Kane's of the academic community or the journalistic community, can really make a move in making sure that this thing does rise to the level of public discourse. That's what we're looking for. Will the academic community move into the realm of public discourse? That's the key question.
Maybe
for me.
Project Galileo is one of the examples, right? It's a first step, right?
I think it's, in knowing some of the people involved with that on an intimate basis, I think Project Galileo has one of the best opportunities to make itself known in exactly the same way you just framed it, Francesco. It's right on the cusp of doing that. Just a matter of time. And these things, damn it all, it just takes so long. And that's what frustrates me, and I know it frustrates you.
Philippe?
In your opinion, why are there so many relevant UFO activity near nuclear facilities? Is there a sign that nuclear weaponry will not be allowed anymore?
Yeah, excellent question. Goes back to what MP Larry McGuire talked about, and what my good friend Robert Salas talked about with respect to the weaponry. I guess the best way of framing that whole thing is going back to Jim Mars. I don't know if your listeners or your viewers are familiar with the individual Jim Mars. He was one of the best UFO researchers. He died several years ago. He wrote several books on the UFO issue, and did a lot of interviews. Myself and Errol Bruce Knapp interviewed him in the 90s. And what I think what happened was, if you go back far enough in understanding the whole nuclear issue, is I guess it was pre the end of the war, 1945, when the World War II ended, with respect to the detonation of the nuclear weapons in Japan, the two detonations, and that's when all of the UFO activity really began in a really forceful way with respect to the military aspects of that. And Jim Mars, I think, framed it really well. He said, with respect to the extraterrestrials, he said that the extraterrestrials felt, oh my God, the kids have found the matches. Which meant, we have found a way to annihilate ourselves. In essence, that's what he said. Okay, with the detonation of those two nuclear weapons, and all of the detonations experimentally of the Soviet Union, and with respect to the United States, the extraterrestrials began to understand that the nuclear weapon would eventually become the source of the possibility of us annihilating ourselves, and not only annihilating ourselves, which I think is entirely possible that it could happen, but also disturbing the level of consciousness within the cosmos. From what I understand, and the reading that I've done, and the researchers that I've interviewed, us destroying ourselves, or at least setting off nuclear weapons, sends a reverberation from us out into the cosmos, and it disturbs the level of entanglement within the cosmos. Now, I don't pretend to understand how that happens, but that's what my information has been. I've been told that because nuclear weapons could be used or have been used here experimentally on the planet, everyone in the cosmos is somehow affected. So all of the extraterrestrials who are out there saying, oh my goodness, who are these people on this planet? What are they doing? Oh, they're setting off nuclear weapons. Oh, they've come to the conclusion, and I think they came to the conclusion long ago, that nuclear weapons were no longer or the nuclear idea was no longer a viable option for energy. What they're saying to us is that nuclear energy is not a viable option for energy. Why? That's another discussion altogether. So I think concomitant with that ideology, they have made themselves known to overfly nuclear launch sites to shut down nuclear weapons as a sign that these things shall not, can be, and will not be used here on the planet. And that's what Robert Salas is saying. That's not what I'm saying. Robert Hastings is saying, and a number of launch commanders who've realized this, saying that nuclear weapons will no longer be a viable option on the planet. And not only nuclear weapons won't be, the idea of nuclear energy is not a viable option for the planet. So in answer to your question, I think that's why these so-called UFOs, UAP, these drones here over Canada and other nuclear facilities throughout the world, that they're monitoring that to the extent to which they have to make a decision. Fine, we'll see what these guys are doing with respect to nuclear energy. That's another, that's another discussion. But then what they're doing with nuclear weapons is a serious consequence to the human species. And my assessment, as Robert Salas and I have discussed many, many times, it's not going to be a viable option. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this, and I don't apologize for saying it. I think that any country who entertains the idea of pressing that button is going to meet with serious consequences in shutting down those nuclear weapon installations. I'm confident. I'm really confident.
I have a little bit of a problem with the interpretation that they will not allow us as humanity to use more nuclear weapons, because there have been hundreds of detonations, in all over the globe. So if that was the assessment after the first or second, third, but then there were hundreds, and each one bigger than the one before.
Why
not
didn't
to
you
mention the hydrogen bombs. So I would say there's a little bit of a flaw in that interpretation.
I know, and it's you know what? To be really honest with you, I have a problem with it too. Okay, I really do. Not a problem. It's sort of a oh God, maybe it's a lack of understanding. I'm not quite sure. But if you look at it from the possibility or the perspective, Francesco, of extinction behaviors, okay, and the extension of the things that we're doing to ruin the planet, okay, and I look at what's going on the planet right now as a series of what I call extinction behaviors, okay.
Well, but then you could say, well, if humans go extinct, better for the planet.
Yes. Okay, you got me there. Wipe us off the planet. Let's start all over again.
Well, nature just thanks.
Yeah. Well, see, it's a great talking point, because if you look at what's happening here on the planet with respect to how these so-called extraterrestrials are looking at us, my assessment of that what we're going through, okay, and which what these extraterrestrials are seeing us go through, is replicated by other situations that these extraterrestrials have had with other planets just like us. Earth is not the only planet that these extraterrestrials have visited, interacted, over there are other planets in the cosmos that are doing exactly the same thing as we are, and these extraterrestrials have been there and maybe either helped them through it or left them alone. But we're not the only ones involved in this. We're not the only planet that's trying to destroy itself, and so we're not unique in that way. So I think what we have to do is look at this whole idea of nuclear weaponry as our way of trying to fight through who we are as a species and do the best we can to protect ourselves, with weapons, fine, okay, but also to use nuclear energy as a way to provide a source of energy. Both are mistakes as far as the extraterrestrials are concerned. So what are they doing? What I think that they're doing, this is just my opinion, is they're trying to guide us through saying, it's not the way to go, folks. You can make your own decisions about that because we're not going to intervene necessarily. And if we as extraterrestrial races, awful civilizations, value your planet and you as a species, not only your corporeal being, but your spiritual nature, and don't ever underestimate that. They understand also the spiritual nature of us as a species. We have a corporeal nature. We have this dense physicality, but they also understand that we are extremely unique in our spiritual essence. And I think that's where their interest lies. I think they want to have us understand that not only do we have a corporeal essence that's worth saving, we also have a spiritual essence worth saving. And it's like guiding a child through early childhood up into early teenage years and on from that. You move them forward, you push them forward, you try to guide them. If they want to listen to you, they're better off for it. If they don't want to listen to you, then you know what? Free will kicks in, and you're on your own. And I think that's where we're at here. We could be on our own completely, or we accept the understanding that they are saying to us, this nuclear stuff might not be good for you guys as a species, and it's up to us to listen. Now, whether or not they're going to intervene, hey, that's it. How long's the piece of string? You just don't know. So that's kind of how I see the whole issue.
We are reaching the time that I had thought about for this interview, because we would like to also talk about other themes, of course.
For sure.
We would have to invite you again for another round. But still on this subject, what do you think about the hypothesis of some of these intelligences may be us from the future? Because
yeah, I completely understand your question, man. I really completely
because that
understand.
would make sense about coming to alert us about the dangers of the nuclear. But still,
I completely understand the direction and nature of that question. My sense of that is that when you entertain the idea of what we're going through, okay, as far as the extraterrestrial experience, and I've said this on the radio many times back, when I was doing Strange Days Indeed with Errol Bruce Knapp, and it began to understand what Jacques Vallée was all about. When we try to categorize or understand or conceptualize what's really going on, we cannot eliminate any possibility with respect to what's going on. And I mean, that in and of itself opens a lot of doors.
And that's science.
Of course,
put all the possibilities on top of the table, of course.
Exactly. Everything is on the table. So when you talk about, us from the future, with our limited capacity to understand what that might be about, is there an essence of reality of us saying, there we are in the future. That's us in the future. And somehow we're going to be represented there. And then if somehow that future has a way of coming back and manifesting itself to us right now, wow, we have a very serious situation to ponder. If in fact what you say is true, which it very well could be, given the possibilities of how the cosmos operates, how do we learn from that? What do we do? What do we pay attention to? How do we become attenuated to that possibility? Right now, I don't see the planet even mildly looking at that possibility, but nevertheless, the possibility is there. And the fact that you mention it, just the fact that you mention it, Francesco, represents the possibility of it being real. And we cannot eliminate that possibility. And so, I mean, the future and time and all of that, I mean, time is a weird commodity. And if in fact we're seeing, us in the future through them, we've got a lot of thinking to do. We have a lot of thinking about it.
Because that in some way could make sense of why the cat and mouse play, right?
That's right.
They are here just to observe. They cannot interact. And so they are just observers from the future.
That's right. And let things play out. And maybe, you know, the whole idea too of coming back to the past and joining the past and doing something that alters the future.
So there cannot be interaction.
That's right. I mean, if they do
observation.
Things, it's right. Yeah. I don't know if your viewers have watched the television series called Timeless. They have a machine where they go back into the past and do certain things, and they're very careful not to do things that will alter the future.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's all sort of a very malleable intellectual experiment, but one that I don't think we're ready for yet. But we have to eventually entertain those possibilities. As you said earlier, everything is on the table, and nothing can be disregarded. As weird as all the possibilities might be, as soon as we reject any possibility, then we reject the possibility of an intellectual advancement. So that's why I think the academic community, as you cited earlier, has to become vitally involved with it, because they're one of the only institutions who can really unravel that tangled ball of wool that we're confronted by.
Philippe, any last question?
It was an amazing show. We have to have Victor again with us, so we'll invite him again. Francisco?
And to talk about ICER and
for sure, that's another show altogether.
Yeah. So, Victor, it was a pleasure, an honor. Thank you so much for taking your time on a Sunday to be with us. It was amazing. Of course, we could still be here for hours talking.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, time flies.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you. Time does fly. Yes, as we thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and your great questions. And I hope our listeners really enjoyed it, and give you guys some good feedback so that we can move forward with this and continue the dialogue. That's what we have to do. We have to continue the dialogue, continue the discourse to enlarge in the awareness of what we're all about here. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I do really appreciate it.
E muito obrigado a todos por terem passado este bocadinho de domingo connosco. Não se esqueçam de subscrever, de pôr o like, como sempre. Isso ajuda-nos, com certeza. Espero que tenham gostado e até breve. Obrigado, Filipe.
Obrigado.